Put the best version of the moment out there. Figure out what you want to be. You want to play the piano, whatever you want to do. Figure out what you want to be creatively. Everyone's going to have a different creative pursuit. Whatever that is, figure out what the spec is and ship one out by the end of the week. Get it out there.
Create for No Reason is your weekly dose of inspiration to create what you believe should exist in the world. It's where passion meets craft, and we explore the joy of the creative process and building a meaningful body of work. If you want to hear from someone who isn't afraid to put in the work, this is the episode for you. I was joined by my friend Joe Ciccarone, who is the host of the podcast Built Not Born. He is a really wonderful human. He is a wonderful creator. And one of the things that I really love about this episode is how much he talks about his journey, what he learned throughout his journey of starting the podcast, building the podcast, and what he's doing now to really continue creating and growing and getting better every single day. He really focuses on progress over perfection. So we got into all of that. He shared with us a little bit about his mindset, what he's doing now, how he thinks about his podcast, and really how he thinks about creating and making sure that you are doing everything that you can to put out your best work today. So get some more things out into the world. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Joe, thank you so much for joining today.
Oh, Kate, it's so great to be on. It's so great to be here. I appreciate you having me.
Yes, I'm excited for this conversation because you and we talk offline quite a bit, and we have been holding each other accountable on our creative projects, which is kind of fun.
Yes.
Just little text messages here and there or Instagram messages and kind of checking in, which I talk about a lot, which we need those creative friends in our lives.
Oh, absolutely.
And you do that, and you've been creating a lot. You and I originally met when you reached out to me to be on your podcast, and now you are up to 150 episodes at the time of this recording. That's a lot of episodes, Joe.
Oh, cool. No, I appreciate it. Thanks for noticing. First off, it was so great. Thanks for replying to my email a few months back when my wife, if anyone listened to our previous podcast, my wife's a big reader, and she comes in one day, she walks in, she's like, "You need to read this and you need to have her on your show." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And she gives me her book, and I'm like, "Oh, I'll take a look at it." And I just flip it through, and I'm like 10 pages in. I'm like, "Yes, this is awesome." But anyway, we connected, and it was great. But to 150, yeah, you know what? It starts with what do you do? It starts with an experiment, it scares you. Then you learn a little bit about it and you figure out, I can do this. I might not do it as good as Joe Rogan, Tim Ferriss, Oprah Winfrey, but I can do it pretty good. I'm going to try it. Let me give it a shot. I always have that Tim Ferriss mindset. I'm going to do an experiment. This isn't for the rest of my life. This isn't for the next 70 years. I'm going to do 5. Let me do 5 and let's see what happens. And then I'll reassess from there. And then just interviewed people. And started out with friends that own businesses, and then I started reaching out to low-level authors that maybe just had a local book, and then they would even say "Well, can I listen to your podcast to see if I want to be on it?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't have it yet. I'm recording 10 episodes. Then I'm going to drip them all out. I'm going to release them and have a little I don't have it yet. You just got to trust me that I will have it at some point. I want you to be in the first wave." But anyway, yeah, and then you just go, you iterate, learn, make mistakes, and next thing you know, you're at 150.
Oh, it's so cool. And I love that idea of it being an experiment. Mm-hmm. I think so often with our creative projects, especially now because we are so connected to tons of content, it's easy to compare ourselves to others.
Oh.
And when you first get started, you are almost putting this high bar around what your number one is going to be, but you're basing it on someone's 150 or 200 or 1,000. And it really can stop us from creating. So how do you get over that mindset, knowing that, hey, this is an experiment and I'm just going to go, knowing that it's not going to be the best?
That you hit one of the biggest stumbling blocks when people trying anything. Where just say you're playing the piano and you're like, "Hey, I want to learn to play the piano." Barring your piano teacher and maybe the people that are living inside your house that at the moment, no one knows how bad you are, right? Because you're just like trying to play happy birthday and like, oh, that's not that great. And like, then you could put on like, you put on Elton John, or Billy Joel, who's just slaying the piano, compare yourself to them. And you're like, oh my gosh, like you should take my piano from me. I'm horrendous. And the same thing with podcasting. Like there's so many amazing podcasters out there, right? I mean, there's Rich Roll, there's Ryan Holiday, there's Tim Ferriss, there's Joe Rogan. You compare yourself to like his 2000th episode, right? With his team of 25 people that work for him, the editors and stuff. And then you're going to you'd be afraid to hit play. There's no way you would ship that out. But you just have to realize that you just want to put something out there, have the courage to put your best work out there. And that's version 1. And then just your job is to get a little bit better on version 2. And you might be a little bit better in the show notes. You might be a little bit better asking the first question. Like there's no grand victories where like some D-Day invasion where like now you're there. It's like microscopic wins on each episode. Then when you get to like the 50th, you look back and then you want, like I've cringed listening to my earlier interviews on like the things I missed, the things I said, the questions I asked. But like someone mentioned, I forget who it was. They said like, if you don't cringe looking back 50 episodes, you're not getting any better. If you look back to your second episode when you're on episode 140 and you're like, oh my God, my best work was the second episode. You did not get any better. Like you just stayed the same. Like you should cringe looking back at yourself 10 years ago, knowing that how you evolved, right? Not that you're perfect now, but like you're better than you were at that moment. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. And I've actually also heard if you don't cringe at your first episode, you waited too long to ship it.
Sure.
It's like we can spend so much time. Like I talk to a lot of people and they're thinking about it. They're researching. People love to research. I'm researching. I'm figuring out the right way. I'm coming. And we think that we're being productive when really it's just a form of procrastination. Mm-hmm. Instead of, okay, at some point you have to ship. And we're using ship from Seth Godin, our who talks about shipping, like shipping your work, getting it out into the world. So a question that I think about when creating is, okay, I get that not everything's going to be perfect because that doesn't exist. How do you decide what's good enough to ship versus what you should kind of keep working on before shipping? Like, how do you make that distinction?
That is such a great question. I think that's a question that I literally asked when I was lucky enough to have Seth Godin on my show. I asked him that question. But getting back to your point about like people are just researching and they're looking at it, like he would say it's shipping is a form of hiding, like it's resistance. Like Steve Pressfield would call that the resistance, where you're like, like research, I'm just doing research. And there's a point where you got to do your research, but once you got what you need to do the first episode, more research is just hiding. You're just scared to put it out there. If that makes sense. But like to answer your question, I think you have to have a spec, right? So like my first spec was like, you have to have like some basic parameters. And if you hit those parameters, if you keep polishing it after the parameters are hit, you're hiding. So mine would be like, do I have a guest that's interesting? Yes. Did I ask them a few questions? Did I speak about where they started, where they are, and what they're doing next, and tease out a life lesson or two? Did I edit it to the point where, like, if there's any dead time or if I sneezed, they sneezed, I kind of edit that out just to make it more like a more pleasant listen, right? If all that happens and I edited it and I got a clean MP3 file, I write the show notes and ship it out. That's good enough right there. I just, do I have the guest? Did I ask the questions I wanted to? Did they answer them? Did I edit the podcast into the format? Like if we rambled, if we had a conversation, if I knew the guest and we spoke about something funny that happened, like an inside joke that happened 5 years ago that we're just reliving old funny times, like I'll edit that out because that's not interesting to anybody. So as long as all that is in line and it's a complete episode, if it's not shipped, I'm hiding and I'm scared, and it's a form of procrastination. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And I feel like another form of procrastination is, well, it's not procrastination, it's excuses. A lot of people make excuses for not creating. And when you talk to some people, they're so focused on creators that do it for a living.
Mhm.
And so many people, they do it for fun. Like
Yeah.
podcasting is their fun thing. They write books for fun. They any kind of creative pursuit. They learn how to play the piano, they do yoga, like all the things that bring us a lot of joy in our lives. But when it comes to creating something or putting something out into the world, I think we can get stuck in this phase of, oh my gosh, we have to monetize it. We have to figure that piece out before we even start. So you actually do have a role. You do sales. Like you're not a full-time podcaster, but you
No.
do this.
No, I
So
would be eating government cheese living under a bridge
yeah.
if I relied on my podcast for income at this point. Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk about that, because I think it's helpful for people, for all of those of us in the world that, just like what I talk about in the book, right? Living your creative life without leaving your job. You don't necessarily have to make this your full-time thing. If you want to, that's amazing. Awesome, wonderful, make it happen. But you don't have to, especially not when you start. So let's talk about, where do you find the time to do this? You have a wife and a job and kids, like you have all the things.
Yep. So put it this. So I'll say two things we'll speak about. We'll talk about golfing and we'll talk about Netflix. Okay. So let's go golf. So it is not uncommon to have a guy or a girl enjoy golf. Maybe they join a country club or like a golf course they go to all the time with their friends. They might go every weekend. They might go twice. They might go 9 holes during the week, 1 or 2 rounds on the weekends. I mean, that's probably a nice, healthy thing, fun thing to do, right? Are they joining the PGA Tour, getting paid to golf? Even though they golf maybe 10 hours a week, are they getting paid? Do they have a sponsor, right? Do they have to buy their own? When's someone going to buy their clubs for them? No, they're buying their own clubs. They're paying their own green fees. They're paying their caddy. They have to rent the cart, right? Well, why aren't you getting paid golfing? You enjoy it. You're having fun. There's benefits. I'm outside. I clears my head. I get to talk to my friends. I close business deals. Like there's 1,000 great reasons why to golf. Netflix. All right, you go home and you watch Netflix. Are you a producer? Right? Are you dreaming up creative ideas to start your own show? Are you going to do a prequel to that show? Is that why you're watching it? Because you want to sketch out what a cool prequel would be? No, you enjoy it. You're having fun. Maybe you watch it with your wife, husband, boyfriend, girlfriend, and you watch it, and it's like it's a part of your day where you talk and you kind of bond with them, right? So same thing with the podcast. You can there's definitely podcasts that are monetized, and not saying I would at some point there wouldn't be some sort of income with the podcast I have, but not the goal right now. A couple benefits. One, it keeps you current. Like one, we're not dying. Like I said, dinosaurs is a bad word, but like it's pretty cool being like, over 30 years old, over 40 years old, and being able to turn your computer on and know how to edit video, know how to use Opus Clip, know how to use the script, know how to use Alphonic, right? Know how to use these programs that like 20-year-olds would use, right? And then you use it, and you use it at a pretty high level where you can create MP3 files, you create YouTube videos, you edit it, it keeps you current and in the game and relevant, if that makes sense. And then my podcast is an interview format. And I started out reaching out to people that I knew, local business people, local authors, 100 episodes in, John Gordon, Seth Godin. I turned the computer on. I'm talking to Lord Andrew Roberts, who is in Parliament in London and who writes books with General David Petraeus. And we're talking about the Ukraine war, right? Crazy, like absolutely insane. And I'm talking to Navy SEAL snipers that won like high level medals in Iraq on 3 combat tours. And they're talking about what it's like, having their position overrun. Like it's crazy. I'm sitting there. I'm like, I can't believe this person's talking to me and we're having this conversation right now. So like one, it makes me better, but then unselfish, I guess that's the selfish component, but unselfishly, I get to edit it up. I get to get that interview, get that knowledge and share it with the world and throw it out there and say, here, like Seth would say, here, I made this. You don't have to accept it, but like, hey, if you're interested in learning what it's like to be a SEAL Team 3 sniper in Iraq, right? during the Battle of Fallujah. Here's an hour of someone who did that, right? What's it like to, how did John Gordon create the energy bus? Here, I spoke to John. Here's 20 minutes on him talking that. Why did Seth Godin write a book on strategy? That's a #1 bestseller right now. Here's Seth talking, he and I speaking about that. And just sharing it. One, I get better selfishly, but I get to share it with the world. And then some episodes like hit and I'll put an episode out and it won't do much. There's some episodes I love and I'll throw out there and I go, oh, this is the episode where it's really going to take off. And very average downloads, very average views. And then other ones I'm like, it's a good one. It's the next one. It hits spec, right? Not my favorite one of the last few months, but it's Monday and I need to ship one out. And this is the one. This is the next one. So I ship that out. Then I look and I'm like, that did that many downloads? Like it just connects with an audience and it's like triple the downloads that you thought it was going to do. So
I guess so funny. Yeah. I feel like that happens with creative work in general. I feel like you create something, you're like, this is it. This is the thing. This is the article. This is the poem. This is the whatever that it is that you created, this piece of art, and you put it out and it's kind of like, oh, it didn't go anywhere. But then there's something that you could write that you put out. And it maybe took you a few minutes. And you're like, it's just kind of ramblings. And here you go. And that's the thing that blows up. It's like, you never know what people are going to resonate with.
Because we're not in charge, right? Like we're not, because it's like a very stoic thing. Get back to Ryan Holiday. We control what we put out there. It's almost like an arch, like a Stoic philosophy would say something like an archer. You control holding the bow, you control holding the arrow. And then when you pull out, right, you pull and you shoot the bow, the moment it leaves your hands, you're not in control. You have no idea. You could just call like a quarterback can just call the right play and can throw the ball and put it in the receiver's hands. He can't catch it for the receiver. Sometimes the receiver catches a touchdown. There's other times where it hits their face mask and they drop it. And you can't control the outcome. You can just control the process, right? So that's pretty cool. And also too, even if you see like our first one, our 10th one, our 70th one, you got to go through that iteration to get to the 500th one that maybe it does go crazy or maybe it is your best work and it's recognized by maybe someone of influence and they go, wow, that's really good work. Great job. Seth told a story in one of my podcasts. He's like, are you a Billy Joel fan? I'm like, yeah. And he goes, did you ever hear of Billy Joel's demo tape? I'm like, no. He goes, you can find it. It's somewhere online. It sounds like Billy Joel, but it's just not that good. It sort of sounds like Billy Joel, but it's not that good. And like Billy Joel had to go through that in the 70s or whenever he recorded that tape to get the Piano Man, Scenes at the Italian Restaurant, and like Only the Good Die Young. Like you got to go through like, all right, this is my first one to get to the 700th one that's like, boom, that you might be known for, right? Not known for, but like is a version of your best work.
Yeah. Well, it takes time for people. I mean, you hear comedians talk about it. It takes a while to kind of gain your perspective, or your different, what's your differentiator when getting up on stage? Like, what's your point of view? That's the better way. Like, what's your point of view? And then people really understand that. So when I think about the people that I really enjoy, they have a very clear point of view. Look at Ryan Holiday. We both really enjoy his work and his stuff is very similar. Like he pulls from Stoicism. He pulls from these lessons in history. And he oftentimes writes about leaders from forever ago, right? And the Stoic philosophers to make his points. And you come to understand that of his work. And so I feel like it takes a little bit of time for people in general to develop what that is for them. And I think especially with multi-passionate people, which you and I both are, and many of the people listening, it's hard to pick the thing and go with it. Yeah. It's hard to say, I'm going to choose to do this podcast in this way, or I'm going to choose to write about this particular topic and stick with it, because there's a level of discipline in doing that. And when you say, yes, I'm going to start doing this, you're saying no to all these other things. And sometimes we get so focused on, but what about these other things and these other ideas that I can talk about? So how do you decide? Well, you started the podcast and you stick with the podcast. Are there times in your life where you feel like you have that challenge of figuring out where you want to go with it, what else you want to do, how else you want to improve it?
100%. Oh my gosh. So it started out as a blog. If I have a website now, and I have a real great guy in San Fran. His name's Boston Blake. He did my website for me, and it started off with a blog, and I just started writing a blog like in like 2014, maybe 2013, and I would post like one every 2 weeks. Then I was doing one a week, and then I would, and so like I was posting on just what I noticed. Like just different things I noticed. I blew my knee out. I did a series on what it's like rehabbing your knee. I did a series of like what it's like rescuing a dog, and like just like what was going on in our life. And I would send it out. And then I'm like, in the podcasting started getting popular. And I'm like, man, that scared me. Then I started going to that. Then I dropped the blog. Then I felt like I really wanted to do the blog again. So I'm like, how can I do the blog and the podcast, but not it overwhelm my life? Where like, it's a side thing. And, I have a job, I got a family, I got kids, got a wife, and I got a whole other things to do besides the podcast. How can I continually show up for that? And so I'm like, you know what? Let me do a blog derived from the podcast. And I stole an idea from Tim Ferriss. Tim would kind of do like an episode recap. He would kind of do an episode like, hey, I had Lord Andrew Roberts on, and he would talk about like, here's the link to the episode. Here's something we spoke about. I'm like, that's pretty cool. And then I saw his book. I loved his book, like Tribe of Mentors. Mm-hmm. And he kind of just like asked people questions, and like he took the best answers from them. And they're like, he has like 80 guests on like each one has like 3 pages. So like, I'm going to do a Tribe of Mentors for each episode. So each one I listened to the transcript, and I picked the 4 things I learned from that guest, and I call it 3.5. And I use the 0.5. The 0.5 is kind of ties the other 4 together. And anyway, so I write a blog now once a week where I just tease out, I go, these are the 4 things I learned, 3.5 things I learned from Kate Volman, from Seth Godin, from Andrew Roberts, from NFL GM Michael Lombardi. This is what I learned from them, and I ship that out with a link to the YouTube video and the Spotify. And I get probably as much, if not more, feedback from the email than I do from the podcast. People like will reply back. I just get as much feedback, and I see the numbers bounce too, where like I have the podcast comes out, people listen, then a week later I send out the email that has the links to the Spotify and YouTube, and you see it kind of goes up, then it kind of plateaus out. Then a week later I send the email out and you see it spike again. If that makes sense. It kind of gives people that missed it. No, people are busy. And maybe, the X amount of people that look at that email, the few hundred subscribers look at that email. A few of them click on and they either watch the YouTube clip or listen to the Spotify in the car on their way home from work or something.
That's cool because you're getting feedback from the creative project that you're doing. So it's cool. So I'm going to tie this together because first, you're noticing what other people are doing, right? You're out there, we're consuming. You're like, oh, Tim Ferriss, this is cool what he's doing. You take it and run with it, make your own. Mm-hmm. Then you do your own thing. And then you start sending out this newsletter, and then you notice, oh, okay, so the newsletter actually sometimes gets more feedback, which makes sense because when you think about it, it's way easier to read an email, take 3 minutes to read an email than it is to listen to a 30-minute podcast. Yep. So for some of those people, they're thinking, hey, I might never listen to Joe's podcast. Absolutely. I just really love these emails. And so you're getting people from in different ways, which is awesome because people consume differently. And only by doing the work and only by starting to put things out, were you able to even come up with that? Like a year ago, you probably wouldn't have come up with that newsletter idea.
No, you needed you needed the old podcast, the old blog that had stopped. Then you needed the podcast. Then you have a podcast that you're like, wow, I want to get the blog back in. Like it's iterations. It's like you have to have one, have the other, to have the third thing. If you didn't have 1 or 2, the third thing would never happen, right? And the one about consuming different content, there's a local CEO here in Philadelphia who I probably asked to be on the show like 3 times. And all 3 times they told me no. But I said, well, you at least look at the email. Will you join the email list? Because absolutely. And probably once a month, every other month, I'd say like 5-6 times a year, he will reply back to the email. Hey, great post. Oh, I love that. I love that idea. Or like, thanks for sharing. Where he said, I don't listen to podcasts. I don't go on podcasts. I'm not interested in your podcast, but he consumes information through like newsletters. And like we have an interaction now over the newsletter. He'll still won't come on the podcast, but there's someone that wouldn't connect with at all with the material I was putting out until I put it in another format, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. There's people that and our taste changes.
Mm-hmm.
So there's people, if you would have asked me 2 years ago, who are my favorite podcasters, that list is very different than it is today.
Absolutely.
Because you learn, you grow, and this the way that that certain people do their content. Sometimes I really appreciate it. And then there's someone else that I might find. I'm like, oh, I appreciate this too. And so there's only so much time in the day. And you get to kind of evolve your taste. And I think that's really wonderful too, because then hey, there might be people that, Built Not Born is for them at the specific time in their life.
Yeah, sure.
And maybe they stay with you forever. Maybe they come and stay with you for a year and then they go.
Sounds like my kids. No, it's funny. I don't think anybody it's just not for everyone. Like, it's not for you. It's not like, another thing I learned from Seth, probably, like if someone does some art, painting, sculpture, music, podcasting, whatever their art form is, and you don't connect with it, it's not bad. It's not good. It's not weird. It's not different. It's just not for you. Right.
Yeah.
And you have to be comfortable with the 99.9% of the world that says that this isn't for me. Like, and I had one guest who was a MMA fighter, came on and said, he had a coach and he wrote like this self-help book. And he's like, dude, right off the bat, you're handicapped yourself. And he's like, why do you say that to the coach? He's like, the coach had something like, I'm making this numbers wrong, like 6% of the world wants to improve. Like that doesn't want to get better, but constantly says, I want a self-help book. I want to take a course. I want to level up. I want to pay money to take this course to be better at this. Where most people just think, well, I want to get better and I'll figure it out as I go, but not have no real plan. Like less than 10% of the people want to focus their time, money, and energy on a specific way to get better. And he wrote a book on how to get better. So he goes, you initially took 90% of the population, you just took right off the table because it's not for them. If that makes sense. And that's like Built Not Born. It's just like I tease your creative ideas out. And like, if you don't want to get creative and you don't want to have a podcast, you don't want a YouTube channel, or you don't want to make a record or whatever you want to do, become a yoga instructor, that your book's probably not for them. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, if they don't see themselves as a creative person, like, it's unfortunate. Like, it's not for everyone, and you just got to be good with it.
Yeah, that number is so low, which makes me so sad, but I know that it's true because I get reminded of that from some of the people in my life, and they remind me that not everybody wakes up excited about life and wanting to learn and grow and read and listen to podcasts and listen
I think
to
it's
YouTube
weird.
videos.
They think it's weird. Like I'll have conversations with my family. They think it's like I had people actually say, like, why do you do this? Or like, not even the podcast.
Yeah.
Like, why do you read books? Like, I'll read a book on sales. They go, Joe, you've been in sales for 20 some years. Right? And you should have it figured out by now. And I'm like, I'm okay. But like, I know I could get better. Like, I could get better if I do it for another 20 years, I could still get better. Like, I'm always trying to get a way to present an idea, handle an objection, help someone quicker, like speed the process up. You know what I mean? Or like, be more refined in what I do. I just know there's so many holes in my game. And like, it's just weird to me to think that everything's okay. And I'm going to tie something up together. Like, you see the jiu-jitsu shirt. I discovered jiu-jitsu back in the late 90s out of college. And at the time I was a black belt in karate, like stand-up fighting. And I thought I was a tough dude. I'm not that big, not that strong. But I'm like, if I got in a fight, I would be pretty tough. Like, I mean, I know a million people can kick my butt, but like, I would be a tough out if we got into a fight. And then a Brazilian jiu-jitsu school opened up in Center City, Philly, Maxercise. And in the mid 90s, I go, let me stop down, just let me check it out. And I thought, like, I'm pretty tough. I walked in there, and within 5 minutes, I was so exposed. My ignorance was so exposed, which I didn't even know I had. I'm like, hey, what would you do here? And they put me in a situation, and I had no idea, like, absolutely no clue. Like, the color went out of my face. I'm like, oh my gosh. Like 10 years of training. And I'm like, I had no idea what I'm doing. And like, sometimes you got to be aware of some people. It helps to be aware of your ignorance, if that helps, if that makes sense. Like we're all ignorant in something, and it's sometimes some people proactively go after their ignorance, and some people it just visits them all of once, and you just have to brace for impact because it happens at the wrong time, at the least opportune time, if that makes sense.
You don't know what you don't know.
Yes.
I think about that all the time. And I think that the older that I get, the more I realize how much I don't know, even though I think I know a lot. But I always realize it because of but you realize that when you are learning and growing and you discover new books and new content to really help you think about life a little bit differently, which is why I think it's so important for people to expand their knowledge in lots of different areas, because that's essentially what creativity is when you're making connections from one thing that is a complete opposite industry or perspective or idea, and then you can tie those two things together to create something really remarkable. And so the more that we get to learn and grow, the better. So let's talk a little bit about books, because you and I are both avid readers. So what are some of the best books that you've read this year?
This year, great question. The one I am just in the middle of right now, I'm reading one. I got one on Audible, just currently what's on my end table. I'm reading James Patterson's Tiger, his biography on Tiger Woods. And I'm not a huge golf fan. I don't think I've golfed in 10 years. And but Tiger Woods always fascinated me a little bit. And James Patterson is an amazing writer. And he usually does like these like fiction books about the world exploding and someone trying to save a volcano from ending the planet or something. He does these crazy like Jack Bauer 24 stories. This one's a biography on Tiger, and it's awesome. And it's like real short chapters, 3-4 pages a chapter, and just takes Tiger Woods from like 5 years old and just walks him through to where he is. I'm like midway through, and I try to read a chapter a night, and it's awesome. And then listening, I'm doing Bill O'Reilly and Mountain Duggar's Confronting the Presidents. He does the Killing series, which is Killing Lincoln, Killing Kennedy. He does. Are you familiar with those books? The O'Reilly's books, the Killing series.
I've never read them, but yes,
they're awesome. They're all fiction. They're all like factual stories where he kind of draws from a bunch of sources and tells a story of like how Elvis died, how killing England, how the United States beat England. This one, I guess he went through everyone that died. Now it's confronting, and he has Confronting the Presidents. He starts with Washington and does and he has like 46 chapters. There's one on each president, and he talks about like the most monumentous, like how they came to office, the big problems they dealt with, how they dealt with them, and what the ramifications were through history. I'm only through to like maybe, I think I'm at Teddy Roosevelt right now. I'm right around the 1900s. I got from George Washington to Teddy Roosevelt. And it's awesome. Like if you like American history, it's just like a sweeping narrative of American history, which is really good. But that's probably the two most recent things I went through.
Cool. What is the biggest aha moment or learning that you've had that has made the biggest impact in your life this year?
Great question. I think two things. One, speed up the process, and like courage. And courage, I mean, then you think of courage, you think of the word like battlefield, like first responders running into a fire, running into like a cop running into a building where like there's a 911 call. Like that's like real physical courage. Talking like say creative courage, like just like for the everyday person. I had someone tell me right off the bat, get YouTube up early, right? Or for the podcast. And I was just afraid. Like it just scared me. As podcasting scared me, like I'm like, dude, one fear at a time. I'm getting the podcast out. And then I just didn't have for some reason, I was afraid to get the YouTube up and have like, this visual up. And then about 100 episodes in, the same person called me. He's like, will you please get up YouTube? That's where podcasting's going. You have all this great stuff on Audible, on like Spotify and Apple, but you got to get it on YouTube. And I reluctantly did around, I don't know, like episode 110, roughly 120. And so maybe like the last 30 episodes are up on YouTube now. And like the audio, it's just so much better. Where it's not that I'm a good YouTuber and my SEO kind of stinks, but like there's some episodes that like I'll have an episode that'll get 5,000 audible downloads, 500 audible downloads, where I'll get 2,000 YouTube views. Like it's 4 times the audience it connects with YouTube. And and if you go for like Google or like you're trying to get yourself, like if someone Googles your name to be on the podcast, say I reach out to maybe a noted guest, maybe their assistant Googles me just to see, is this person worth going on their show that I have no relationship with? Maybe I just reached out to them. Like YouTube gives you so much more. Like you come up on the first page, you look like more of I wouldn't say a bigger deal, but you look more relevant for them to go on your podcast and just be on Spotify alone.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I was just, somebody had just told me they I think YouTube was this in line after iTunes. So it's iTunes and then YouTube, which, all these platforms are so interesting because they want to compete with each other, right? Like with the short form video, the podcast, the audio, like all the things. And it is interesting to see how many podcasters have really nice setups and they have studios and they do a lot of that stuff. So it lends itself nicely, like visually to YouTube.
Can we talk about that for a second?
Sure.
I struggle with that because if you look now, the trend is now, not knowing it's going to stay there, but the trend is now everyone has like this amazing studio and the lighting's perfect. And they have these like $1,000 microphones and they have these super high def cameras with this lighting. It's just perfect. And then they have one camera for a minute, another, you have 3 different angles. It keeps switching. It's like you're watching a television series.
Yeah.
And that to me would get me stuck. Like if that was the thing, one, I probably wouldn't want at this stage of like where I am in life with like kids going to college and like, taking family vacations. Like, I don't know if I want to drop 10 grand on like podcasting equipment. I probably have, but I that would get me stuck. And Tim Ferriss actually had an episode on this. Like he's bypassing that. He wants to put really good conversations, really good information, tease out like the habits, tactics, secrets, not secrets, like best practices of like really like ballers, of real people that are making a difference in the world, tease them out and share it with the audience. If you want to do it with a beautiful, like 7 camera angle, beautiful, perfect lighting, cool background, go get it. I tip my hat to you, but I purposely decided to keep doing it and not get stuck. I'm not doing that as of right now. Like maybe something changes later, but I'm just going to put great stuff out. Like I had let's say a crisis, but like that had my attention for like 10 days. Like I go, do I have to buy 2 new cameras, a better microphone, better lighting? And I'm like, I'm not doing it. Because it would get me stuck. It'd be more complicated. It would take more time to get the audience out. And I rather just keep putting good content out there on a consistent basis and put it on YouTube, get the blog going and put it up on the Audible apps like Spotify, Apple, Google, all that stuff, than doing a pretty show, if that makes sense. I'm doing this all myself and I'm like, I don't feel like hiring anyone right now. Like I want to put those resources to other places. So like I decided to keep it simple, stupid, and like slow is smooth is fast. And
I think this is a conversation around the goal, like people's goals, right? For some people, if their goal is to have, if that's what they want to do and they have the resources and they want it to be their full-time thing and there's like very specific things and they can, and like you said, if they want to do it, absolutely. But for a lot of people, there are some constraints. And I think constraints are actually good because it makes us be more creative. And for some of those folks, they might, which would you prefer? Would you rather have a incredible high quality studio and not great content? Or would you rather focus on what you can control, which is the content, getting great guests, asking better questions, becoming a better interviewer, all of that kind of stuff? So
here's a real bad analogy, but it's just where my head goes, and you could keep this in or edit it out. But like, do you ever go like, all right, go back to college, right? You have like these rundown, ugly houses. Let's say but you have these great people, fun times, and it's like, oh my gosh, just one of the funnest Friday nights you ever had, and there's nothing fancy about it. But then now, like you're 45, 50 years old, you go over to some person who's well-to-do in their not mansion, but real big house and the landscaped yard. And, it looks like a Pottery Barn showroom and you're just bored to death. You go into the party kind of sucks. The food's kind of good, but just like the conversation's not great. and it's just like boring people, and you're like, oh, this isn't really my crowd. Like, just because it's pretty inside, it doesn't mean it's going to be fun. And like I'm trying to keep it like the college party, my podcast. Like, you go in, it's real simple, like wired microphone, like decent lighting, decent audible. I make sure the audio is really clear, like, decent video. Like, I could see you, you could see me. It's kind of high def. It's a high def camera at least, and just get it out there and don't worry about it. It looks like Pottery Barn, or, it looks like super cool in the background. You know what I mean? Because if I'm competing with that, I'm going to lose, because there's people that there's podcasts that are like funded by Spotify. People are multimillionaires doing this stuff. There's some really famous people doing podcasts. There's no way my set could be the coolest set. So I'm not even competing there. If that makes sense.
It goes back to 1% better every day. If you can get better every day, and you know what, that 1%, 1% is going to add up. And then maybe one day it is that does mean that you get a studio. But for now, I really always go back to that quote: start where you are, use what you have, do what you can.
That's it.
And that's, if we focus on that, then instead of like looking at all these other people, like, what can you do? What are the things you have in your control? And everyone has access to, if you're watching this, you have a camera, you can have some earbuds in and have some type of microphone, and there's things that you can do to just get started. And when you do get started, that's when that creative courage happens. You have to actually be doing the thing in order for you to get that type of courage.
You got to do the bad version first, or at least where you are. And it's not bad. It's your best work right now, but it might be bad a year from now, looking back. You got to do that. That's like a step. Then you do the next step. It's 1% better. In each step, you move up like 1%. And then if you keep going, you will iterate, you will get better, and you'll grow as a person. It'll make you a better person, if you believe that or not.
Better every day. All right, Joe, what is one thing that our listeners can do in 10 minutes or less to live a more creative life?
Put the best version of the moment out there. Figure out what you want to be. You want to play the piano, whatever you want to do. Figure out what you want to be creatively. Everyone's going to have a different creative pursuit. Whatever that is, figure out what the spec is and ship one out by the end of the week. Get it out there. Whatever, is it YouTube? Is it like on your website? Is it a CD you want to, is it like something you want to put out on Spotify? Whatever it is, get the first version out there and let it interact with the world, and maybe share it with like 5 people you trust that you think that may benefit from this, not benefit or connect with this. It's just, say you're playing the piano, find 5 people that love piano music and send it to them and say, what do you think? And if it's good, they'll thank you for it and share it with one person. If they don't connect with it, they'll say, you see that look? Say, hey, what's missing? And if they're piano fans and they're like your audience, take their feedback, then make version 2. And that'll be at least 1% better. Then send it back to them. And if it's good enough, they'll tell one person about it. They'll share it with somebody, because good ideas get shared, right? Yeah. What do you do with a good article? You share it. What do you do with a great song? Got to listen to it. Like a great series you're watching, you tell a friend. Like, you always tell somebody, like, hey, this book's great. This restaurant's great. You share it with somebody, and eventually someone's going to go viral. It's probably not going to be me. Probably not be you, but you can slowly grow your audience by sharing it with your crew and getting 1% better.
And hey, you never know, Joe. You just never know what thing you're going to put out in the world that lots of people are going to resonate with. That happens every day to the most unsuspecting kind of people. So keep creating is what I say. Joe, thank you so much for joining me today. I so appreciate you. And everyone needs to check out Built Not Born and learn how to live your best life.
Yeah. And Kate, first off, thanks for having me on Create for No Reason. I was so excited to hear you're getting this going again. I remember I was walking around New York City, and I got your email that you had it going, and I listened to it. I was walking the High Line in New York City, and I listened to the first episode of the reboot. And like, I think I texted you from the High Line. I'm like, hey, I'm in New York. I go, keep doing this. This is awesome. And I steal some ideas from every episode. And no matter what they're creating, it's like principles that you could put in all parts of your life. And you're doing great work. So thank you for having me, and keep going. You're doing great work.
Aw, thanks, Joe. You're the best. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And more importantly, I hope that you got at least one idea, an aha moment, a takeaway that's going to support you in moving your creative project forward. If nothing else, I hope that you feel inspired and empowered to create and put out your work, to know that it's not perfect, but that you have an opportunity to get better. And we can only get better when we're creating and sharing and continuing to show up every day for ourselves, for our creativity, and for the people that we want to impact. We can get so stuck in our heads, especially around our creative work. So I hope that this and every episode of Create for No Reason empowers and inspires you to move your projects forward. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate you. And until next time, create something.